One of the wonderful pictures of how God guides and shapes us from the book of Jeremiah, of course, the potter and the clay. I suppose that's a wonderful metaphor for our role in the process and what God's role is.
I say, well, whose job is it to get the clay right in the centre of the wheel? And eventually they come to the conclusion it's the potter's job.
Yeah.
And I said, whose job is it to make the pot? And they say, well, the potter. And so I said, well, what's the clay's job? And they finally come to the place, well, it's the clay's job is to submit and to surrender to the potter. And so I often ask them the question, well, how long have you been trying to make yourself? And then I say, well, how successful have you been? When are you going to stop trying to make yourself and just surrender to God and let him do it?
The clay doesn't even get to decide what type of potter gets made into it.
And I think for me personally, as I've come to this revelation, is that more and more I'm saying, God, I just surrender. When a potter is bringing things up between his fingers and his thumbs, if he feels any sort of a matter that's in the clay that shouldn't be there, he can just go like that, flick it. And he said, because of the speed of the wheel, it'll just disappear off. He said, I think God would say to this group that we don't need to worry about our sin, that when we submit to him, if he feels anything in us, he can just flick it out. What I need to do is just submit. But how good is that? It takes a little bit of the pressure off us. And I think there's a lot of guys out there who struggle with it. And in actual fact, in submitting to God, we then allow him to deal with the sin that's causing us a difficulty.
How do we tell the difference between God's purpose for us and our own longings and aspirations?
Well, there's an interesting verse that says that if you like, submit ourselves to God, that he will give us the desires of our heart. All right? Are you familiar with that verse? Well, it actually means in the Hebrew to be soft and malleable, like clay.
Like clay, yeah.
All right? So if you're soft and malleable, let me ask you this. Whose desires are you going to have in your heart? His desires, right?
Yep.
So he's actually going to give you your desires, but they're going to be his desires because you're soft and malleable. And so I think that the reality is that those desires that are in us actually come from God.
Yeah.
Because we're submitted to him. One of the things that we believe in Promise Keepers is these four-wheel drive groups, having a group of men that we work with on a weekly basis or fortnightly basis, whatever you decide to meet. And for me, that has been critical. I have done that most of my life. Right now, I have a group of 4 other men that I meet with every Thursday via the internet. And I think that when you're also going through the painful times, that's when you need those 4 guys who can carry you on your pallet to Jesus. The reality is, though, that men often isolate themselves. And when you isolate yourself, you become vulnerable. What do the lions pick on? The animal that's not a part of the herd. And so we have a roaring lion going about. He's looking for men who are isolated. And so often men say to me, well, how do you start a group like that? Well, you can join one, that's one way, or you go and find one other person, you start praying with them, and you ask God for a third, and then you pray with them, and then that's how you do it. You just pray, you just ask people and invite them in.